Hello from Gardening at Douentza in Ireland, and I'm Rachel. Now today I'm behind the camera to give you this May garden tour. So May, a wonderful time where everything is just beginning to come into full flower. It looks absolutely wonderful. You might find some background noise here today, and that's because we're having the house painted behind me. So it's all good. I'm not going to ask them to stop. Oh no, we're just going to continue with the video and do the best we can. Don't worry, plenty of beautiful things to look at. For anyone new, you should know that my garden is a private one and it's based here in Wexford in Southern Ireland. It's an acre in size, which is about half a hectare, and my hardiness zone is roughly zone 9, although we don't use hardiness zones here in Ireland, so I guess putting it into those terms, that's roughly what it equates to. It's summer now, we're in May, and let's go and have a look at the garden. And I guess the first thing you're going to notice is my laburnum tree, which is looking absolutely magnificent at the moment, and it is just coming to the end of its flowering. You can tell by the confetti that's all over the tarmac here, little bits of yellow and white that have fallen down from the petals on the racemes and make it look like a wedding has taken place here. Now this is a large mature tree that's been in the garden for over 20 years. I'm not going to go on about it a lot because anyone who follows my Instagram will have been splattered with photographs of this thing as it came into flower and continued. And also my last video from Coolock Garden where I showed the laburnum arch has probably made you quite sick of laburnum at this stage. As for me, I'm delighted to keep looking at it. And I just think it's absolutely wonderful to have something like this that is trouble-free, maintenance-free. Okay, the odd branch needs to be removed, but it just gets on with it and doesn't need any input when you compare that to all the trouble you need to do with perennials in the border. But they're worth it too. And working up from that confetti I just talked about through the Furcraea, which is just about to come into flower and looks absolutely magnificent, to a few bearded irises in full bloom. And of course May is the time when the bearded irises shine, and they last for such a short fleeting time, but they're so worth it because those flowers are so voluptuous and they're showstoppers really. I'm so delighted to have this blue one for so very long. This has been, I've had this one for over 20 years as well. Goodness, that's the second mention of 20 years so far in this video. Makes me sound so old. But the truth is that I'm not very pleased with what these irises have done this year. So we see a couple in flower, but this is a bed full of them. And this portion here, over here to the right, just completely failed to flower. And that was because they hadn't been divided. And I couldn't get in here last year. There was so much foliage in July that it was difficult to get in and divide them. And as we all know, the time to divide irises is in July. So I just said, oh, blast it, I'm going to do it anyway. And I dug up all those irises that failed to flower and divided them. So we'll see if they will put up with this kind of abuse and whether they will flower next year. Irises of course need to have their rhizomes baked to perform well, and here we see some that are planted to the correct depth with that rhizome exposed. Now when you divide and replant, you're probably going to have to bury them a little bit, but hopefully the iris will work its way to the surface and that baking will happen. Here at the very front we have my anthemis, which is going to be spectacular this year. Now I actually lifted and divided this last autumn because it was kind of falling open in the centre and looking a bit bare there. So wait for it. Next garden tour, this is going to look amazing. So just before we venture into this section of the garden, a little look at the flower beds along the main drive. And this one here with the variegated yuccas is looking quite full at the moment. The big culprit, I guess, is that hardy salvia, that big leafy thing right there in the middle that just seems to want to take over the world. I'm very fond of this little geranium here at the front that just, I mean, it's quite hardy and it just keeps on giving. It's become a little bit scrappy in the middle, so perhaps this is a candidate for dividing this autumn. Okay, so in through the arch we go and let's have a look at those flower beds. It's a beautiful sunny day today, just perfect for showing you around the garden. And I suppose first up I need to show you my box balls. So this is what I fondly refer to as my cloud pruning area, and the idea is that eventually all of these box balls here are going to meld into each other like, I don't know, fluffy clouds. Now they haven't been clipped yet this year, nor has the circle just there to the right, but I'll get around to that soon. I suppose this is a little touch of formality to the garden. It's good to have something that provides a bit of structure. I love perennials. I love the ephemeral nature that they have and the transience of the flowers, but it's good to have something steady too, a steady eddy. And box balls or box hedge or box interspersed in various borders can provide that structure. You'll notice the odd little native foxglove that's decided to seed in here among the box balls. And when I was weeding, I thought, will I take them out? But then I thought, no, do you know what? A spire of pink coming up between these structures is going to look absolutely super. But then after they flower, I will remove them because I don't want them crossing with the lovely white foxgloves I already have in the garden. Now you should know I have suffered from box blight here with these bowls, and what I used was a product called Top Buxus, which is just excellent, and I still have it. I still fill a bottle and spray these plants, and in fact I'm going to do that soon because I don't want that coming back again. Okay, so now we're going to take a little gander down this strip of grass here, a kind of shady section behind the laburnum tree, one that I don't show you very often. Now first up, you'll probably note that there's a lot of cut grass on my borders. This isn't on purpose. It's a byproduct of unwillingly taking part in No Mow May. Now you may have heard of No Mow May. It's a scheme among gardeners whereby they let the grass grow long in May just to encourage wildlife. It's a very personal decision as to whether a gardener will take place. Personally, it just does my head in. I can't be dealing with that at all. So I don't take part, but our lawnmower was broken. So unwillingly, I took part in No Mow May. Now the end result of that is that when the grass eventually got cut, it was so long that it just couldn't be collected and has skited everywhere into the flower beds. So as I'm going around and weeding and preening, one thing I'm also doing is scraping grass off with my hands, which is great fun, but there you go. So these are the trials and tribulations of being a gardener, I guess. Anyway, I just wanted to point out this border because it had a complete revamp last autumn, and a couple of things I did was to remove a whole load of plants and to divide some existing ones and dot them around the border. And one plant I did divide was my glaucidium, which is this gorgeous, gorgeous perennial that produces large blue flowers. Now I have in fact divided it into 3, so hopefully next year I'm going to have a super flowering. And the beautiful white hydrangea called Annabelle, it's an arborescens actually, that I planted last autumn and made a video about, is going to flower for me this year. Hooray! Now I didn't actually prune it. I thought the year after planting, just leave it be and prune the second year. And I think I've 3 or 4 fluffy flower heads brewing, so that's absolutely wonderful news. And moving further down that stretch of border, we come across some sedums which have been Chelsea chopped. Now, do you know about the Chelsea chop? The Chelsea chop is a technique to, well, the RHS says if you do the Chelsea chop, it will make your plants flower better. But I don't know about that. What I do know is that plants that are prone to flop later in the season are less likely to do so if you give them the Chelsea chop, and I have done it here with my sedums. So doing the Chelsea chop involves removing 1/3 of the length of the stem of your plant. You can only do this with certain plants, and the sedum is certainly one, and it involves doing it in May, so the plant will have time to recover and to go on and produce flowers, albeit a little bit later than it would have done if you'd left it alone. And down in this very shady corner, I just wanted to show you the last mad tulip which has just lost its petal and is, well, I guess it's not long for this world, but it's a parrot tulip there at the front, the yellow and red one, that has survived for many years in a particularly shady area, which is counterintuitive. That's not what tulips like, but anyway, you know, I won't knock it. And moving away from that shady arm of my long border to the main section, the main place where flower colour happens in summer. Now it's flanked to the left by this large rhododendron, and yeah, let's go and see what's going on. So over to the left of that border we have a shady section. There are a couple of trees up above that provide some shade, and the rhododendron just to the left, and I'm quite pleased with how this planting has turned out. We've got a lot of things that are providing contrasting leaf shape. We've got the podophyllum spotty dotty, which is the one there on the left with the splodges on the leaves. We've got a hosta, we've got the smilacina or myanthemum at the back, which smelt absolutely fabulous when it was in flower, and we have the Japanese painted fern there at the front. A couple of things are being squeezed out, but this is something I can fix in autumn. And down here you can see that the podophyllum is in flower. And here behind that clump of shady planting you can see my dactylorhiza, which are hardy orchids. Now they are the ones there with the speckled foliage just at the front, and they will have a purple flower in time. I made a mistake, I planted them behind the other stuff, so actually you can't see them from the front of the border at all. I'll have to fix that in autumn. Now we're waiting for the fireworks to start in this border, but in the meantime, just to make it neat, I have trimmed the euonymus, which is that yellow bush you'll see echoing down the length of the border. We have lots to come here, from alstroemeria to dahlias to achillea to geraniums to sedums, just so much stuff, but we will have to wait just a little bit. And here we are looking across at that section of the long border, just waiting for it all to happen. It's May. It's funny, you know, some years are different to others. In certain years the geranium would be in full flower by now, or even the alstroemeria would be well underway, but just a little bit slow this year. But that's okay, do you know, when you know it's coming, that's fine, you can wait. And before we leave this section, just a little mention of a rhododendron, that red one there on the left called Marquita's Prize. Doesn't usually flower for me, so I'm delighted to see it in full bloom this year. Isn't it funny how we can be so sentimental about these things? The rhododendrons that flower every year, which is the vast majority of them, I just take that for granted, whereas this one, who hasn't bothered for the last couple of years and is suddenly in flower, it's like, oh wow, wonderful, welcome. And it's a very good year for the abutilum. Now I grow the hardy abutilum called vitifolium, and it has so many flowers this year. And while we're over in this section, we'll just have a look at this place that I planted up, goodness, it was last year anyway, and I guess this is the key to keeping your garden dynamic and relevant, to keep looking at things objectively and deciding what isn't working and deciding to replant. And this section here, okay, you know, it's going to need a year or two to get going, but it definitely needed a revamp, so that's what we've done. And let's not forget the little things. Let's have a look at that gorgeous thing down there. Okay, there's a little bit of weeding to do around the plant because my verbascum has just seeded everywhere. But I'm so delighted to see this little fella come back. I did have a scotch grass problem in here in this border, so I applied weed killer when everything was dormant. And then when this little fella didn't come up, I thought to myself, oh no, I've killed it. But I just had to be a little bit patient because up he came in the end. And now we're going to take a walk up this section of the garden and have a look at some of the beds up here. So just to our left is a path and we have some interesting planting down here. The first thing at the very end is the tree lupin, which is this white thing here. Mostly tree lupins are yellow, but this particular one is white. And from where I'm standing, the spicy scent is coming to me in wafts on the air, which is just wonderful. Now, tree lupins do like to grow tall and they do like well-drained soil and they don't like wind. So as a result of all that, I do have the well-drained soil, but I also have a bit of wind. And mine is kind of, how can we put this, is kind of reclining in the border, so bits stick out here and there and I clip them off, but I like it. I like this habit. I like that it's down low where we can see and smell those gorgeous flowers when they're in bloom. And this border just behind the tree lupin is beginning to wake up. A big rhododendron takes centre stage and a double geranium which is just coming into bloom. That purpley blue thing just there below the rhododendron. But to my right we have a lot of new planting, including seedlings, and these are my zinnias that I grew from seed this year, planted out and just going to go on and do great things, I'm sure of it. And up here at the top we have a new peony, a new Ito peony, which is an intersectional cross between a tree peony and a herbaceous one, finished flowering now, and more zinnias planted in front. Now you may recall I had a very tall campanula in here last year which had gotten really too big for its boots, so that's all been taken out and that's why we have the fresh planting. So moving over from that path to the next one, which is just over there and flanked by those two grasses. And down here there's also been some work done in the form of lifting and dividing primroses. Now there was a yellow primrose in here I didn't like, so I took it out and I replaced it with this gorgeous pink one called Avondale that's very vigorous and should carpet this area before next spring. Lots of flowers to be seen then. And behind them on the other side we have a healthy clump of Martican lilies. Now can you believe that Martican lilies have been self-seeding in my garden, the white one, and they've popped up in weird places like right beside trees. Not here in this section but down in the long border, so I think that's excellent. I think the fact that we've had a lot of rain in May has helped to bring these along because they're really looking good. And just over here we can see swaying in the breeze right there in the centre, that tall thin spike, that's my Furcraea, which is a plant I've been nursing along for many years, and it has decided that this year is the year that it is going to flower. And it's a monocarpic plant, so of course it's going to die after it flowers, but it's going to be spectacular, and the blooms have just started opening. Really tall thing. One of them is here in this bed in among the Ligularia, and the other one is elsewhere. But can you believe it? I actually have 3 monocarpic plants in the garden this year that are going to bloom. So while that's wonderful, it's also a bit of blow because they will have to be replaced. And now we're going to enter into the next section of the garden where I want to show you a peony in bloom. So I think this is the only peony I currently have in bloom. It's an intersectional one, and it's called Bartzella, and isn't she just absolutely gorgeous? And here we come to the second monocarpic plant that's going to flower this year, and this is a dandelion tree. It's the one you saw planted in the border in my greenhouse, and it actually got a lot of whitefly, so out it had to come, and I decided, look, I'm going to plant it in the garden, even though it's not hardy. Worst comes to the worst, it'll die in winter, but look what it's going to do. It's going to flower. That's a flower spike there at the top. So good news, I suppose, and bad. And behind us we have some of my carnivorous plants, or Sarracenia, in bloom. And these are the flowers which are really so unusual and I think really elegant. And now we're going to head up this section of the garden and just have a look at the 2 borders on either side. And on the left we have a couple of things in flower, one of which is this lovely orange rhododendron, and I do love orange, such a super colour. And just a bit over to the right of it we have 2 lollipops. So on the left we have my myrtle tree, Glanleam Gold, so it's a variegated one, clipped into a lollipop. And to the right of it we have the laurel tree clipped into a lollipop, which is really difficult because it's hard to get in there at the border and I have to do it by hand. And on the other shadier side we have, well, the Douentza tree is looking good, and we have, yes, my 3rd monocarpic plant that is going to flower. So this is a Meconopsis, like the blue poppy, but it's a yellow one, and it produces a tall spire when it eventually flowers, and then it dies. So I'll have to collect seed, and the foliage is super. Until the point in time when this one flowers, the foliage is just amazing. So I guess that's really why I grow it. The Douentza tree is looking really well this year, and I just love those kind of deep yellow orangey throats on the individual flowers. Looking equally good over this side is Calycanthus Heartledge Wine, covered in blooms this year. The flowers in this one are really special. So we've arrived at the top of that path where the stone table is waiting us, and there's lots of grass waiting to be swept up. So if you want to drop by later and give me a hand at that, that would be super. And here's just a little glance at the planting behind the stone table. Heavy on the hostas and the astilboides. This iris over here is doing really well and has flowered so well after dividing in a kind of semi-shaded position, which is unusual for irises, so hats off to it. It's a great one. Sorry I don't have a name, it's unidentified. Okay, so we're nearing the end of the tour now, because we're not going to go over to the other side of the garden with the painting going on at the house. It's a bit tricky to get over there, but let's have a look at the border in front of the greenhouse. And here's the green border, the one outside the glass house. And we have plenty going on over here in this new section where the tree stump is and where I planted the clematis. So I had a couple of people ask me for an update on the clematis, and I can tell you that both of them, the Montanas, flowered really well this year, which is great. I'm keeping both of them down low on the tree still to kind of clothe the lower portion properly before I allow it to travel up the main stump. The third clematis is for later in the season, so I guess we'll see that in a trip around the garden later on in the season. And one thing that's looking absolutely spectacular now, and has done for a good while, is the Coronella glauca, which I planted out last autumn. So this is one I only ever grew in the greenhouse before, but decided to take a punt with putting it in the garden. And the scent, oh my goodness, the scent is just amazing. And here we have the border I'm in the middle of planting up, where I put the gladioli recently, and my hardy orchid bed down there where the cypripedium are just finishing up. And over here, one of my Cornus cusa, this is the one called Satomi, is in gorgeous, gorgeous flower, and I absolutely love these deep rosy bracts. They look amazing. It's really putting on a super show at the moment. And down here in front of the greenhouse, a shot of my wedding cake tree, which is in flower at the moment, and backed by a copper beech hedge. I wonder where you've seen this arrangement before in a recent video of mine. If you know what I'm talking about, do jot a comment down below. Okay, I guess that brings me to the end of this garden tour, which I hope you enjoyed. And you can expect a shorter video from me on Sunday, probably a how-to or a closer look at 3 plants, but all within the space of 3 minutes, so quite succinct. And then next Thursday, expect a longer video like this one, where I will talk about goodness knows what, probably one of the shows I'm going to soon. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you as always for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.